Здравствуйте. Я
Hello.
хотел бы
I would like to make several
поговорить
statements
на
today
тему,
regarding our joint activities.
которая касается нашей совместной деятельности. Первое.
First,
Мы должны
we
все
must all
понимать, что
understand that the world as a
первым,
whole, well,
естественно,
of
году
course, also Russia,
вступили в
has entered a
сегодняшний новый
completely
период,
new period,
который связан
which is
с
connected with
решением
the solution
проблем
of problems of
управления.
governance.
По нашему представлению,
In our
это
opinion,
было
it has
всегда
always been.
управление
Governance has been carried out using the Noosphere, in which various egregors have taken part.
в которой принимали участие
What is the Noosphere?
различные, что
This is a
такое
multitude of
сфера?
egregors.
Множество эгрегоров. Теперь уже всем
Now
нам
everyone
известно, что
understands
эгрегоры
that egregors can be very different:
могут быть очень разными,
religious,
религиозные,
professional,
профессиональные. Но
but
все
all
это
this is
связано с
connected
тем,
with the
что
fact
в ноосфере
that in the noosphere
имеет место
there is, well, its
своя
own
иерархия.
hierarchy of governance.
Вот как на Земле есть
As on Earth
иерархия
there is a
в
hierarchy,
ноосфере.
so it is in the noosphere.
Еще в 1994
Back in
году мы
1994, I
обсуждали этот
discussed this
вопрос
question with the founder
с
of our
родоначальником
understanding of
наших
torsion fields, Anatoly
представлений
Yevgenovich
о
Akimov.
торсионных полях Акимовым Анатолием Евгеньевичем. Сейчас этот вопрос будет
Now this
вставать
question will become more and more acute.
остро.
In what is its essence?
Что такое
What is the
ноосфера?
noosphere?
На
At the
материальном
material
уровне,
level, at the informational and algorithmic level,
алгоритмическом,
that is, when we talk about the triunity of matter, information, and measure,
информации,
this takes
имеет
place
свое
also in the
имеет
noosphere.
место и в ноосфере. В далекой древности
In distant antiquity, when those who, according to their view, were engaged in global governance, and those who formed the Bible,
и те, кто сформировал Библию, конечно,
of course, they did not live for centuries, as Insider tries to say about it.
инсайдер, они жили так же, как
They lived the same way as ordinary people live.
поэтому здесь
So here we need to understand
что такое
what the global
все-таки
predictor
глобальный
is.
предиктор. Вот та статья,
So
которая
the article that appeared in Молодая гвардия
в феврале 90
in February 1990, Conceptual Power, Myth or Reality,
реальность, она
What Science Should Be in the 21st Century,
или переназвана,
it was simply rebuilt or renamed by the authors, or rather even by the editorial board of the Молодая гвардия magazine,
хотя
although it entered the editorial office under a completely different name.
названием. Для чего быть
For what should science be in the 21st
в
century?
21 веке? То есть была тогда
That is,
академическая газета
it was then the academic
«Поиск»,
newspaper Poisk, and
поставлена
questions were posed in it for all universities in the country.
какой
What should
быть
science be in the
в
21st century?
изменив постановку вопроса на
Changing the formulation of the question to for what should science be in the 21st century, we ended up with this note, which was later called by the editors of the magazine Молодая гвардия Conceptual Power, Myth or Reality. But studying in general the work of the editorial board of the Молодая гвардия and the fact that there were no responses to the article, it became clear that in 1990, that is, 27 years ago, there was no idea of conceptual power then, although there the priorities of generalized means of governance were pointed out. Now we need to figure out what the global predictor is. What it is, how this global predictor governs, and does it govern? An analysis of what has happened over many centuries has shown that the so-called global predictor has not risen to the understanding of the entire function of governance. But none of the leaders of the countries of the West and the East has this understanding. Although even for those who are a little familiar with the conceptual apparatus of the sufficiently general theory of governance, the concept of the entire function of governance is already commonplace. If in the apparatus of governance there is no understanding of the entire function of governance, then there can be no concept of a global historical process. And now all the events that are taking place in the world speak of this. I will not list them because it will take a long time, but I simply urge everyone who is interested in the problems raised in the conception of social safety to ponder over how governance proceeds through the noosphere using the sufficiently general theory of governance. And the last section of it, the theory of supersystems. Such a statement of the task is the first. The second thing I would like to address, especially to our youth, to those who are interested, again, in the problems raised in the conception of social safety, this is the problem of translation. That is, now I was especially surprised by the last interview I gave to an Iranian journalist or a journalist from Iran. I didn't quite understand the reason why the audience got so worked up about this. Then gradually, while communicating with those who were recording this, with our comrades, I realized that it was just for the first time one of my speeches was being simultaneously translated into English, although simultaneous translation into Farsi was needed. We had another recording on April the 21st of this year, when a whole team of Iranian television journalists came to us from Iran. It also lasted about 2 hours. And all of this puts us in front of a question. The internal predictor of the USSR, of which I am a representative, immediately announced its understanding of the global level of responsibility. If you remember how many complaints there were against us, why did we not immediately put out dehermetization? Why, after the first edition of Deadwater in 1992, did new editions follow in 1998 and 2004? There were such claims. We are hiding something. We, for some reason, don't want to give dehermetization. And the subsequent editions of Deadwater, they suffer from cutting, additions. But I always have a question for such controllers. Show me where concretely we have added something inadequately. Of course, we all live in a process. We are also in development. And it is natural that new things appear. 65 books written after the appearance of Deadwater speak to this fact. And in new editions, of course, all the things that were not included in the first edition, they appeared in subsequent editions. Well, the fact that dehermetization appeared much later, even later than the first edition of Deadwater, it is also not bad. At first we wanted to make corrections for dehermetizations, but then we realized that this does not make sense. Let it remain for those who study this process, an idea of how this process went. Therefore, I would like to urge the youth, especially those who study languages, to begin a full-fledged translation of materials on the conception of social safety. The fact is that on the basis of the conception of social safety now being formed, and it has already been being formed over these 25 years, is the egregor of the alternatively encompassing in relation to the Bible conception, and on how we will disseminate this information, that is, on how the translation into many languages will go. So, with a greater or lesser speed will the process of spreading the conception of social safety in society go. Now the next question naturally arises. Why has science not accepted the concept of the noosphere? What is the noosphere? And even though a lot about this has been written, nevertheless, all the participants in this process also need to ponder on it. Second, the question of the localization of this noosphere will inevitably arise. In 1994, there was a discussion of this problem. That is, humanity roughly represents the localization of the stratosphere, ionosphere, Van Allen belts. But no one can imagine where electromagnetic waves or gravitational waves are located. They are everywhere. It is the same with the noosphere. What is the noosphere? This is the result of the intellectual activity of all mankind, precisely of all. Although, according to the types of the structure of the psyche, humanity is divided into animals, zombies, demons, and humans. It is natural that hierarchies are built in the noosphere, and at the top of this hierarchy, the human type of psyche structure. And we believe that precisely to the human type of psyche structure corresponds the sufficiently general theory of governance, with its theory of governance, with its last section, theory of supersystems. And if this is so, that theory of governance, which occupies the highest position in the hierarchy, becomes obligatory for all lower types of the structure of the psyche. And therefore it is not so important who from the political leadership of this or that country do not understand or do not accept or ignore this information. They will have to follow the algorithmics set forth in this information. In the theory of supersystems, those who have tried to study it have an initial understanding of the supersystem. This is the element of the supersystem and the supersystem as a whole. Then it was shown how, depending on various factors, territorial, energetic, they are not uniform across the globe, so regional centers of governance arose. This is how a multi-regional, inter-regional conglomerate was formed. And this is how a multi-regional bloc, with its own centers of governance, was formed. If we look at this process now, we are at the very end of it. And the last section of the theory of supersystems says that sooner or later, after the collision of an interregional conglomerate with a multi-regional bloc, which was perceived by the conglomerate as simply another conglomerate, that after it crushed into fragments, debris, and absorbed, and this of course, although it's an abstraction, but you can give this abstraction concrete ideas, it absorbed these fragments along with the defective vectors of objectives. Because while there was a multi-regional bloc, this is the Soviet Union, the People's Democracies of Eastern Europe, then it was very difficult to identify the potential vector of objectives. But as soon as the destruction of the multi-regional bloc began, it immediately became possible. And not only vectors, potential vectors of objectives were identified, but also defects in the vector of objectives of this bloc. So the interregional conglomerate, having absorbed the fragments of the multi-regional bloc, absorbed the defective vector of objectives along with them. And this process has started working now. We will witness how the Baltic states, Eastern Germany, the former people's democracies, will begin to understand something about what is happening. We see that when the multi-regional bloc collapsed together with the Soviet Union, the European Union formed and strengthened its interregional conglomerate. And now, when trends of recovery have appeared, although this will not be possible within the former borders, the borders will change, expand, but hysteria in the West. They are afraid precisely of the restoration. They are afraid that the Soviet Union will be restored. They are not afraid of the right thing. What will be restored will be much more than the Soviet Union. That is why I call on everyone who learns languages, who are becoming professionals in translation. Because it makes no sense to involve professional translators in this matter. They are the relay horses of enlightenment. But amateur translators can do a lot. There is a group on Vkontakte that gathers translators and who are already working on solving this problem. As an example of work with other countries, I would like to say a few words about the successful activities of our comrades who work with Iran. Well, I myself watched this recording of an interview with an Iranian journalist, but not only that. In Iran, in the University of Tehran, at the Faculty of Foreign Languages, they publish a magazine in Russian. It is called Novy Put. Here I have number 1, a magazine in Russian, the University of Tehran, the Faculty of Foreign Languages and Literature. And you see, an article has already appeared here. It is of course in Russian, but a man wrote it, a citizen of Iran who speaks Farsi. And what does the article say? It is about Lermontov. But there will be articles about Pushkin, the dull melancholy, and no one to offer a hand. We need to make sure that we can offer a hand to all representatives studying the materials of the conception in any country.